I stood on the deck of the Pharaon, the sun setting over the horizon, casting a bloody orange glow across the water, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that my life was over. Not because of the storm, not because of the captain's death, but because of the small, crumpled piece of paper that rested in my pocket, the one that proved my closest friends had orchestrated my complete ruin. That piece of evidence, which I had just risked my life to secure, was the key not just to my freedom, but to their utter, systematic destruction. They took my liberty, my love, my future, everything. And in that moment I wasn't Edmond Dantès, the naive, joyous sailor they knew. I was merely a weapon, forged in the iron furnace of the Château, Audif, waiting to be unleashed. The sheer weight of the revenge I was about to unleash could crush a man, but the thought of letting them walk free was far heavier. I had become the architect of my own justice, and the blueprint was pure, cold malice. Was I wrong to dedicate my entire existence to making them suffer 1,000 times what I suffered? Tell me honestly, if you would have simply forgiven the people who condemned you to a living death. The story really began with a wave of fortune so powerful it should have warned me of the coming undertow. I was only 19 years old, an assistant to Captain Leclerc on the merchant ship, the Pharaon. We were nearing Marseille on our final leg home, and the captain was ill, tragically succumbing to brain fever shortly after we departed Elba. It was his dying wish, a secret mission, that set the first stone of my prison. He entrusted me with a package and a letter, which I was to deliver to a certain person in Paris after a brief stop in the Mediterranean. I never thought twice about it. An order from the dying captain was sacred. When we finally dropped anchor in Marseille, I was greeted with news that changed my life. I was to be the new captain. The owner, Monsieur Morel, an honorable, decent man, had promoted me on the spot, recognizing my skill and loyalty. I was young, yes, but capable. It was the greatest moment of my life. I remember the salty air, the cheering crew, the handshake from Morel, the promise of a golden future. But even brighter than that future was the face of Mercedes. Mercedes was my world, a Catalan girl, with hair like the midnight sky and eyes that held the depth of the Mediterranean. She wasn't just my fiancée, she was the reason I breathed. Our wedding was set for the following day, a simple, joyous affair. I rushed to see her, intoxicated by my promotion, eager to plan our new life. But even in her sunlit little fishing village, shadows were gathering. There was Danglars, the ship's supercargo, a man whose jealousy was a cancer on his soul. He had coveted the captaincy and saw my promotion as a direct, unpardonable theft. His pen was already hovering over the inkwell, poised to write my death warrant, and then there was Fern, and Mondigo, Mercedes's cousin. He had loved her silently and fiercely for years, a love that turned to poison the moment she chose me. His face, when I told him the news, was a mask of forced cheerfulness that cracked to reveal a desperate, hungry malice. I missed the warning signs because I was too happy to be suspicious. Happiness, I learned, is a vulnerability. The three of them, the jealous bookkeeper, the spurned lover, and a third party, Château, a drunken, envious neighbor who witnessed their plot but lacked the moral fortitude to stop it, met in a little tavern. Danglars drafted the accusation, a masterpiece of false flags and plausible deniability, accusing me of being a Bonapartist agent carrying treasonous correspondence, referencing the very letter the dying captain had given me, Fern, and, driven by his blinding desire for Mercedes, delivered it. Château, weak and cowardly, simply drank and watched my life burn. The very next morning, the day that was supposed to be my wedding day, just as I was sharing a final, tender moment with Mercedes, a squad of gendarmes burst in and arrested me. The confusion, the shame, the horror in Mercedes's eyes, it was the last innocent thing I ever saw. I was dragged away, my protests meaningless, my dreams shattered like glass on the stone street. I was taken to the Procureur du Roi, a man named Villefort. He was ambitious, ruthless, and utterly obsessed with his own rise in society. When he first questioned me, he seemed ready to dismiss the whole thing as a petty prank. I told him the truth about the letter, that it was from Marshal Bert and to an agent in Paris, but that I had no idea of its contents or purpose. It was an act of humanity, not treason. Villefort was about to let me go, to acknowledge my innocence, until I revealed the recipient's name, Noirtier. The blood drained from Villefort's face. Noirtier was his own father, a vehement, notorious Bonapartist. To protect his own political future, to bury his father's dangerous past and save his own reputation, Villefort committed an atrocity. He burned the letter, destroyed the evidence of my innocence and the proof of his father's guilt, and sentenced me to silence. He signed the committal order to the Château, Audif, an island fortress from which no one ever returned. I was thrown into the abyss, condemned not by justice, but by a man's cold ambition. The Château, Audif, was hell. A cold, damp stone tomb. Day bled into night, week into year. The loneliness was a physical weight, crushing the spirit out of me. I cried, I screamed, I prayed, and then, finally, I simply stared into the darkness, losing all sense of time and self. I was no longer Edmond, I was just a number. It was in the darkest moment, when I was contemplating suicide, preparing to starve myself to death, that a sound, a faint scratching noise, saved me. It was the sound of another prisoner, digging. That prisoner was the Abbé Faria. The abbé was an old, wise, brilliant Italian priest who had accidentally dug into my cell after years of trying to tunnel to freedom. He became my everything, my father, my teacher, my friend, and my salvation. For years he taught me history, science, philosophy, languages. He remade my mind, transforming the ignorant sailor into an intellectual powerhouse. He didn't just teach me to read books, he taught me to read men. He taught me the true nature of the conspiracy that imprisoned me, painstakingly recreating the exact chain of events based on my testimony and his knowledge of the world. It was the abbé who named my betrayers, Danglars, the jealous worm, Fernand, the desperate snake, and Villefort, the ambitious viper. The knowledge didn't free me, but it gave me a new purpose, a reason to live, revenge. It was no longer about escaping asterisk to asterisk Mercedes. It was about escaping asterisk for asterisk justice. Then, just as my education was complete, the abbé had a final, fatal seizure. As he lay dying, he entrusted me with the second key to my freedom, the secret of the colossal treasure hidden on the island of Monte Cristo. He gave me the location, the cryptogram, and the certainty that I would one day be rich beyond measure. His final act of love was to make me a king. When he finally died, I realized my moment had come. I knew his keepers would simply sew his body into a sack and dump it into the sea. With a desperate, terrifying surge of will, I swapped places with the corpse. I was sewn into the canvas shroud, my heart hammering against my ribs, lying next to my dead friend, waiting for the guards. The sack was carried out, swung through the air, and I plunged into the freezing, liberating water. I cut my way out, battling the currents, finally dragging myself onto a deserted patch of rock. I was free. I was a ghost. My first act was to find the treasure. Years of careful planning, months of diving, and finally, there it was. Mountains of gold, jewels, and ancient artifacts, the unimaginable wealth of the Spada family. The ignorant sailor was gone. I spent years traveling, acquiring more knowledge, perfecting my disguise, and molding myself into something new. Something cold, mysterious, and powerful. I became the Count of Monte Cristo. I returned to the world, not as the boy they destroyed, but as an omnipotent force. My face was aged, my voice changed, my entire demeanor utterly foreign. I was their judge, their jury, and their executioner. My revenge was going to be meticulous, precise, and entirely lawful. I would not commit murder. I would simply ensure that their past sins became their present destruction. I would give them enough rope to hang themselves with the weight of their own corruption. So that's the situation I was in, an immensely wealthy, perfectly disguised avenging angel, standing on the precipice of their lives. Villefort was now the king's attorney, untouchable. Danglars was a baron and a powerful, respected banker. Fernand had married Mercédès, that thought still claws at my soul, and was now the decorated General de Morcerf, a peer of France. They had everything I had lost, and more. Before I tell you what happened next, the meticulous, terrifying unraveling of their lives, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have started with a simple, brutal confrontation, or would you have preferred the slow, agonizing burn of subtle, engineered ruin? I began with Danglars. The man who valued money above all else would lose his soul to it. Through my connections, my seemingly limitless wealth, and a calculated series of introductions, I infiltrated his life. I established a massive, tempting credit with his bank. Danglars, greedy to a fault, saw me as his financial salvation. I began subtly feeding him false, disastrous information, giving him sure investments that were, in reality, carefully baited traps. I had one of my agents, Bertuccio, the man I had employed as my steward, open an unlimited line of credit in Danglars's bank for the general's son, Albert de Morcerf. Danglars, blinded by the potential for profit and my endorsement, accepted it. His obsession with my wealth made him reckless, making him lend enormous sums of money to unreliable ventures I suggested, all while his own actual capital dwindled. I watched him like a scientist watches a microbe under a microscope, as his greed destroyed his judgment, his reputation, and his entire fortune, which ultimately evaporated in a catastrophic series of bad loans and a final, spectacular failure on the Spanish stock market that I orchestrated down to the minute. The day he learned he was ruined, he fled Paris, an international fugitive. He was captured, deprived of his last shilling, and left to starve until I appeared to him, a spectre of his past, and revealed myself. I let him live, a ruined, broken, penniless shell of a man, because for him life without money was a fate worse than the death he condemned me to. Fernand's downfall was more personal, more satisfying, because he took Mercédès. The general had built his entire career on a lie, a betrayal so foul it was a stain on the honor of France. I used my resources to unearth the truth about how he acquired his title and wealth. He had betrayed his commanding officer in Greece, selling the city and its citizens, including the Pasha, into slavery to the Turks, then keeping the ransom money for himself. It was a secret tucked away in forgotten archives, but I brought it to light. The exposé was published in the Parisian papers, creating a scandal that rocked the nation. Fernand was brought before the Chamber of Peers to answer for his crimes. The evidence I provided, meticulously sourced and undeniable, led to his utter disgrace. His name was stripped of its honor, his fortune was gone, and his son, Albert, realized his father was a villain. When Fernand fled, hunted and shamed, he came back to his empty house, having lost his reputation, his family, and his son's respect. The only one waiting for him was Mercédès. She recognized me. My grand disguise, my new life, my Count of Monte Cristo persona, all shattered when she simply said my name, Edmond. She begged me to stop, to spare her son. For Mercédès, the only person I had ever truly loved, I relented. I spared Albert's life in the duel we were set to have. I allowed her and Albert to live on, penniless but free of his corruption. Fernand, unable to live without honor, shot himself, leaving a final, sickening mess. Villefort's revenge was the darkest, the most horrifying, because it struck at the one thing he valued more than life itself, his family and his reputation. I knew the secret of his political ambition and his bastard child with Madame Danglars, the one he had tried to bury alive. Through a series of subtle manipulations and a perfectly timed anonymous letter, I exposed his buried secret to his own family. Simultaneously, I befriended his second wife, a woman who had a cold, murderous ambition of her own to secure her son's inheritance. Unaware of my true identity, she believed I was helping her. She poisoned the members of the Villefort household who stood in the way of her son's money, including the grandparents and the first wife's children. When the full horror of her crimes was revealed, when the police surrounded their home, and the depth of the poisonings came to light, Villefort was utterly undone. He lost his reputation, his wife was arrested, and his remaining child, a young boy, was the last victim. Villefort, witnessing the utter devastation of his life's work and his family, finally went insane, digging up the remains of the buried child he'd believed dead years ago, babbling like a madman. I had intended to reveal myself to him in his moment of final despair, but looking at the man I had turned into a weeping, deranged wreck, I found no satisfaction. I had exacted my revenge, but the price was a piece of my own soul. I walked away from the wreckage I had created. I settled a final matter of conscience with my old employer, Monsieur Morel, the only man who had been kind and tried to save me. Unbeknownst to him, I had spent years anonymously restoring his financial health after his business almost collapsed in my absence, righting the wrong of his loss due to my imprisonment. As the Count, I arranged one final act of kindness for Morel's son, giving him a huge diamond and ensuring the family was secure forever. My cycle of revenge was finally complete, but I was still alone. I stood where I began, on a ship, looking out at the endless sea. Mercedes, a broken woman, had found peace in the monastery. I had ruined 3 lives, but in the process I had almost ruined my own humanity. It was Haydée, the beautiful, sorrowful Greek princess I had rescued from slavery, a victim of Fernand's betrayal, who taught me that life could still hold joy. She taught me that true power is not in the ability to destroy, but in the strength to forgive and to love again. I sailed away with her, leaving the ghost of Edmond Dantès and the Count of Monte Cristo behind. The grand lesson I learned, after spending a lifetime chasing vengeance, is a simple one, and it's the moral I want to leave you with. Human wisdom is summed up in 2 words: wait and hope. I waited for my moment, and I placed my hope in the future, a future that was not defined by my hatred. I hope that none of you ever have to endure the kind of injustice that transforms you into a monster. But if you do, remember that forgiveness, or at least moving on, is the ultimate freedom. Like this video if you were on my side through this whole terrifying journey, and subscribe for more stories like this that delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Tell me if I was justified, or if I went too far. I'll see you all in the next story.